listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute and NACS.
Hey, and I'm John Eichberger, author of the Fuels Institute and NACS. Great to be here with our guest and you, Donovan.
Thank you, sir. Now, John, you know that data is everything. In fact, it tells us who our customers are, and did you know that it can even tell us what's happening underground in our storage tanks?
Of course I did.
Well, we're joined here by a special guest here, John Kelly, not John Eichberger, but John Kelly with Canary Compliance, and it may sound like this is a very difficult topic to understand, but it's a very important topic to understand. John, what does Canary Compliance actually do?
So Canary Compliance, first of all, thanks for having me on here. Really appreciate it.
And for the listeners, because there's two Johns, it's not going to get confusing. I talk right, he talks funny.
Depends what side of the ocean you're
Right.
from. But anyway, no, so Canary Compliance is a remote ATG monitoring hardware and software company, and we provide data analytics to people that are monitoring and managing underground storage tanks, primarily for compliance.
That's a very good name you chose, Canary, I'm assuming because of the early warning detection that helps in.
Exactly.
Very good word.
Wait, that's a police song, isn't it?
It is.
Oh, and there's that. There you go. All right.
Maybe that's the title of my next blog.
Nice.
Canary in a coal mine, baby.
You don't want to have to pay Canary Compliance for that, though, but...
There might be a royalty fee.
But, you know, we've known you, John, for a couple of years now. I remember you would come down from Philadelphia down to the D.C. area. Is Canary Compliance a new company?
We are a relatively new company. We spun out a few years ago from an environmental consulting firm that was specializing in UST compliance, remediation, things like that. We saw an opportunity to, take the technology they developed to do underground storage tank remote monitoring, take it to the next level, really modernize it, update it, and then leverage the power of analytical tools to help, folks manage their compliance, their alarms, or everything related to their storage tanks.
It's a frustrating position that I'm in because I look at the retail market. I have been doing this for 19 years, and I pay attention to the market very closely. I pay attention to underground storage tanks. I was part of the effort to reform the regulations in 2005, yet it seems like a lot of tank owners take it for granted. The fuel comes in, it goes in these big containers underground, it comes out of the nozzle, and that's all they think about. What should they be paying more attention to? Because it's a huge investment, huge risk if they do something wrong, but if they're not paying enough attention to it, there's some catastrophic challenges.
There are certainly catastrophic failures that can happen. I think, retailers may take it for granted. I think consumers certainly take for granted
absolutely.
What retailers have to do to get them the fuel.
I mean, I heard somebody tell me, those gas retailers are really smart. They can put their stores right over where all the gasoline is.
Exactly. But, I think the sort of one-off catastrophic failures are certainly terrible and want to be avoided. But I think there is money that is lost every single day when people are not, really analyzing what's going on and acting on intuition versus acting on data when it comes to responding to something that's happening with their underground storage tank system.
So what kind of data should they be paying attention to?
Well, I think there are, a few specific examples that we've seen people, capitalizing on. Certainly when tank alarms come in or line alarms come in or central alarms come in, there are lots of other contextual factors that may go into how you react to that and how you respond to it. Things like the alarm history, things like the weather, things like, what else has happened at that store? Was a delivery just happening right now? There's all kind of context that can go into it. The same individual alarm can mean something very different if it's paired with other contextual data. So we've sort of pulled it all together so that people can have a clearer picture of what's the condition at the site versus the specific alarm, and then have to sort of dive down a rabbit hole and figure out what's going on.
Right.
So, what we've seen, for instance, is, people leveraging, for that, if they're filling a tank, a delivery's coming in, are they overfilling the tank? And if they are overfilling the tank, they often have to go and make sure there wasn't a spill. And so many responsible operators do the right thing. If it's gone above 95%, send someone out to go check on it. But, if you didn't actually have to do that, or if you didn't fill the tank above 95%, then you wouldn't have to spend the money to send someone out to the site. So people have started to leverage the count of overfilled data to say to their fuel carriers, hey, we're going to monitor how often you overfill. And if you overfill, we're going to fine you, or we're going to reward you for good behavior. And so really sort of applying data to create a business process that improves the performance, lowers the risk, and saves money.
You know, Donovan, John used the term responsible retailer, and I'd love to be able to say that every retailer out there is responsible, but I remember when we were working on the regulations that require operator training. And the question was, why do we need operator training? Because I talked to EPA officials that go into stores, and the clerk they'd say, where's your overfill alarm? Oh, we turned that thing off. It kept going off. Like, the system only works if it's turned on, and it only works if you're actually paying attention to it.
That's exactly right.
Well, let me ask you this, then someone turns that off. Is ignorance bliss? I mean, does that mean that if I didn't know that actually something happens, I'm not really in trouble for that?
Well, you're on site. It's your problem, and you've got to respond to it. And I certainly don't think that ignorance is going to keep you out of having to respond to something and take corrective action on something. But, I think there is a way to support the people on site who often aren't trained properly and are new and are young and inexperienced and unfamiliar with all the complexity that goes into actually responding to these things, by having reliable remote systems that help diagnose and provide sort of corrective recommendations, so that you're not completely dependent on some 18-year-old high school kid who just got a summer job at the Citgo station on the corner.
Right. It's we are dealing with so many issues right now in tank management, and we have corrosion underground storage tanks. We're hearing of the potential for systems degradation with gasoline in storage tanks. Mm-hmm. We are having challenges with the quality of fuel coming out of the nozzle. What type of data analytics are available to help a retailer monitor that? We know you got to keep water out. You've got to keep your filters clean. You got to pay attention. You got to make sure you don't have any leaks going on. But how can they leverage data to help them improve product quality maintenance?
Yeah, great question. There are some interesting things that you can do with data as long as it's good data. A lot of people have, they know what their tanks are made of. They have that in some spreadsheet somewhere, but they don't really leverage it and couple it with the real-time data coming in from their tank monitoring system. Mm-hmm. Say, for instance, you're able to sort of take a step back and, assess trends of, okay, well, how many tank alarms are we having for all of our single-wall steel tanks that have diesel in them?
Right.
Is that trending up? Is it trending down? If we understand a certain type of piping, are we seeing more alarms with a certain type of equipment there? With a certain type of fuel that's flowing through it and things like that. Are there certain, other aggravating factors that we could look at? I think the industry is so focused on fixing the problem right when it happens that oftentimes they're not necessarily having the time to step back. Mm-hmm. And we think that's where, sort of some of the more sophisticated software tools and analytical tools can really help people identify these worrisome trends ahead of time and be preventative, because leak prevention is much more affordable than leak reparation or remediation or detection.
We were at the NAC show in 2018. I was talking to a variety of retailers, I had a couple sessions on talking to suppliers on the exhibit floor. It's like $20, $100 a preventative effort. Some retailers go, I'm not spending the $100. But the consequence is maybe a $20,000 equipment replacement, right, or a remediation effort is going to cost you six figures or more.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because we've actually seen some innovative work from regulators around this, because a lot of people look at compliance as just a cost center, mm-hmm, where they're having to spend money every month or every year. And with the new regulations, the 2018 regulations rolling out as of October 13th of this year, mm-hmm, what we've seen is that the cost of compliance is going up. The EPA says it's going to go up. The PMAA says it's going to go up. Everyone admits it's going up. How much more it's going to go up is open to debate. But what we've seen is a state like Utah. What they've created is very interesting. Mm-hmm. They've looked at the risk profile of the sites. They've based it on data. They look at the likelihood of a release and the severity of a potential release based on the type of equipment that's on site, based on their compliance performance previously, historical data, stuff like that. The severity of the release has to do with how close it is to a water source and things like this. But they create a risk profile. And if you're in the low risk profile, you're inspected once every 3 years and you get a rebate on your tank fees. If you're in level 2, you get inspected once every other year and you get a slightly less rebate on your tank fees. If you're high risk, you're inspected every year and you get no rebate on your tank fees, because they're supposedly a less responsible operator or whatever, mm-hmm, it may be. But that's an interesting way to incentivize compliance versus just to have it sit there as a cost center. And I'm hoping that more states are going to be open to adopting things like that, innovative approaches to sort of leveraging market forces to drive compliance as a competitive advantage for, mm-hmm, people.
Well, just to see who actually would be affected by something like this, just out of curiosity, maybe one of you know, how many sites are actually compliant now?
So according to the latest EPA mid-year report, 70.5% of the sites in the U.S. Are compliant. Statistical operational compliance. There are various things that go into that, right? But it's a little bit worrying that trend at a national level has been going down, mm-hmm, over the last few years. I think with the grades are getting worse, the test is getting harder. That's a bit of a problem.
Well, I think also, John, we're starting to actually pay attention to it.
Right.
Up until we did the regulatory reforms in 2005, we weren't inspecting tanks.
Correct.
We weren't checking them. We were not being diligent about making sure. And I think what we've seen is an increase frequency of inspections and record keeping and reporting. And so I'm not surprised those numbers have gone down. It's terrible the compliance number is so low. We should be in the mid 90s if we're doing the right thing. And quite frankly, NACS advocated strong in '05. If you're not doing the right thing, you should be red tag shut down, period. Because if one tank has a release that puts a black eye in the entire industry, just like every other thing in our society, you have one bad actor, everybody has to pay the price. The majority of tank owners do the right thing or want to do the right thing. We got to make sure they do it.
Correct. Yeah. And I think, again, there are tools for, retailers to work with their local service contractors who have a much better understanding of compliance and the complexity of compliance and what needs to be done to fix things and stay ahead of things. And I've been spending a lot of time at the PEI with the PEI network, and some fantastic organizations that are out there to help individual station operators, large operators, everything. It's really great that there's that resource there, and I encourage retailers to certainly tap into the experts in the space who are the boots on the ground fixing stuff when it goes wrong.
So you mentioned new regulations went into effect in October that could cost some money. What can you give us a quick summary what those regs are?
There's a few different things that have changed. A lot of it has to do with testing requirements, stuff around the hydrostatic testing that needs to get done, contractors are backed up with all types of stuff that they have to do. But I think the other thing is the level of documentation and investigation that's required with the new regulations coming in. People have to say not only whether or not there was an alarm, but how did they respond to it? Did they do it in the right time frame? And what did they ultimately do to close the loop on that? Because if you can't prove that you actually took care of something, then the regulator kind of has to say, well, there's probably a problem here. But there are tools out there to help streamline workflows and keep things organized and manage the enormous volume of alarms that are out there. We looked at about 700 sites over the course of 2 months. Guess how many unique alarms from the ATGs went off, John?
1,500.
30,000. And not all of them are necessarily something that you need to respond to. There's an awful lot of paper out alarms and paper jam alarms and things like that. When you cut all of that out, you're still at 17,000.
Okay, so how much data is too much data?
Well, that's a great question, right? It can be too much data, and I think big data is something that a lot of people talk about. Right. But what's more important is relevant data, and that's why we've gone the direction of understanding the context and the condition and the issue versus the specific data point. You can get a lot of noise, but it might be the wrong signal. Right. What do you really have to do, and how are you supposed to respond to it? What else is going on that may have caused that condition to have arisen? That's what you really need to kind of dig into. And for an individual person, there's too much data to look at, and I think that again, you have to leverage technology to help you pass through all that enormous volume of stuff that you have to respond to.
It almost seems like it's a very hard job. I'm gonna have to be crazy to be in the retail business, the convenience business, because of all the things you have to keep up with. So if you're, let's just say, single store owner, maybe you own 5 stores, and so far, nothing's happened. Things are going well. Is there any ROI for me to really make this effort in checking and doing all this? Because it's been okay. Maybe I bought this site from someone else. It's fine. Do I really have to go backwards? Or what would you say to someone that is really on the fence about making an investment in their tanks and making sure they know what's happening underground?
Right. I think that, you can kind of, play the game of, cover your eyes and ears and plug your nose and hope that you don't hear the tank monitor beeping in the back of the room. But I think
or switch it off.
Or switch it off. Yeah, you shouldn't be doing that.
You think?
These tank monitors are very sophisticated pieces of equipment that can help you determine when there's a risk. And so I think that by understanding the trends that go on with it, not just either ignoring it or reacting to it every single time, taking a step back and, maybe using, again, sort of some kind of analysis of what's been going on. We've looked at people who used to respond to every single alarm every single time that it rained because their sensors were going into alarm. They were realizing they were spending $250, $300 on average to send someone out to go pump some water out. And, when you take a step back from that, you could say, well, let's just look at the trend here. Every time it's raining, we're seeing this happen. Let's evaluate, how I guess how much money would we have to spend to get an ROI? How much time would have to pass to get an ROI on this? And if you're actually looking at the data, you can see, okay, this repair is going to be expensive, going to pay off because in 7 months, because it's going to rain a lot, I'm going to avoid all these unnecessary service calls that have been taking place.
And I'll tell you real quick, you know what? If your alarms are going out that much and you're going out there to check to see if you have to pump out water, if you have water in your tanks because it rained, do something about it.
There's a problem there.
At the NAC show, we had a session on corrosion, and somebody said, "I've got corroded tanks, but I have no water in my tank." And the panelist said, "You have water in your tank. No, you can't have corrosion without water. We're not supposed to be allowing water in our tanks. So if you're people out there, if your alarm's going off saying it's raining, do something about it, because you've got to maintain that water content. Otherwise, the problems are just astronomical."
Well, you know what? I'll play devil's advocate to John and John here. It seems like everyone wants the retailer to pay for everything. With the Fuels Institute, we often hear people say, well, we can just change over fuel and go to hydrogen, go to electric, go to this, and just install this station. There's always a cost. And there seems to be help for automakers. There seems to be kickbacks, incentives, and things to get things going. Is there any help, financial incentive for a retailer to do this?
Well, I think if you're responsibly managing your sites and you're doing so effectively, you'll see the ROI in terms of, reduced service calls and all this type of stuff. You'll see reduced risk of incident. I think that, there's an opportunity, like I mentioned with the Utah Compliance Incentive Program. There are things like that where, I'm optimistic that there will be, ways for people to leverage compliance as a competitive advantage. I think it would be interesting. We talked about risk profiles based on data, right? Imagine if there was something like a, real-time dashboard that could show what the risk profile of a site was, and you could sort of have it like a LEED certification. Hey, we're a top tier compliance thing. Millennial consumers nowadays are looking for responsible businesses that they want to buy from. That might be an opportunity to differentiate yourself. Maybe that's a little bit of a pie in the sky thing, but
I don't think so. You have to find an angle to get an ROI on everything, because we can constantly say, do this to avoid that. But until that has happened, well, that's not going to happen to me.
Right.
I mean, come on, look at me. I'm a good guy. It's no way it's going to happen to me. The worst can never happen to me. But you tie it into, okay, how do you communicate with your customers? How do you make yourself stand out from the crowd in a much more competitive market? Because as demand for liquid fuels goes down, and as consumers start changing their behaviors, and the millennials and their kids start growing up, becoming the purchasing, their values are different than their predecessors. And so I think the combination of an economic argument of preventative maintenance over catastrophic remediation, plus that marketing edge, I think that's a good combination.
Yeah, I think there's also an opportunity for, sort of cutting-edge service providers to say, hey, look, maybe what we'll do is we'll leverage technology to manage that for you. That way the, retailer has a predictable spend when it comes to their sort of compliance budget and maintenance budget. A retailer is able to manage their resources more efficiently. A service contractor can manage their resources more efficiently because they know where the problems are coming up. They can focus their time and energy on the things. They can dispatch efficiently as opposed to just responding to every fire call that comes in where someone says, it's beeping, I don't know why, but come and fix it, please. We see opportunities there where I think there are innovative business model approaches between service contractors and retailers to help raise the bar when it comes to compliance, improve efficiency when it comes to it, and just improve outcomes generally and save money.
If none of these things put fear of God into you, if you're a retail owner, if you own these stores and you're not concerned about it, is there a way, if you're a retailer who just has unlimited amount of money, you can just spend on anything, it's not a bother, you'll go and get it changed, don't worry about it, unlimited. Is there really any coming back if you have a leak? Like, as far as the reputation, the perspective from your customers, your neighbors, how do they feel, and is there really a value you can put on them not trusting you any longer?
There was the National Tanks Conference back in September. There was a very interesting presentation by a retailer, someone who's responsible for the underground storage tanks at a very large retailer, talking about the value of trust. Trust between the retailer and their consumer, trust between the retailer and the regulator, trust between the neighborhoods that surround the gas station and everybody else. It's very important, and that image can be tarnished very, very quickly at very, very high cost. You think about the remediation, potential civil stuff, it just sort of spirals. in addition to PR and all that bad marketing that goes with it. But it's an expensive price to pay, certainly. You don't want to have to get there. But, that's kind of, again, that's the worst case scenario. I think there's lots of money being wasted when it comes to reactive maintenance at the moment that can be avoided with by leveraging, new technology.
I think a lot of times retailers, you're a consultant, they hear consultants say, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to do that, and they go, oh, they're just looking to tap into my wallet. But the reality is the challenges associated with maintaining your tank appropriately are significant. There are certain things you can do, low level, easy, low hanging fruit. There are more sophisticated things you can do. But the risk of not doing the right thing cannot be underestimated or overestimated. And finding a partner that you can work with, they can help you make it work effectively, efficiently, cost efficiently, take the burden off you, is something they should look into. So with that, I'm going to close out and say, retailers out there, let's thank John for joining us. And my recommendation is send the canary in the coal mine before it dies. So thank you guys for listening to Convenience Matters, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.